Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and why the best writers risk being strange. And I'm here with Dan Vadeboncoeur, producer extraordinaire, producer of this podcast. And also, you may remember Dan from talking about Meathouse. Some of the older episodes, if you go back, search Meathouse, all one word, and you can go back and you can find Dan and me talking about this screenplay Meathouse that he's been writing. And so it's been a little while since we got an update on Meathouse. We're going to get a bit of an update on here. And Dan, I just want to start by saying it sounds from what you've been sort of telling me behind the scenes like you're in what's called sometimes the messy middle of this project, where maybe you're past the middle of writing it, perhaps, but in terms of the holistic project, you're sort of in this messy middle position where it can really be tough, and you can get bogged down, and there's lots of reasons for that, which we could talk about the general reasons, but let's just kind of, I think, talk about your specific sort of reasons and sort of where you're at and where things are.
Yeah, thank you. And I like that, the messy middle. I think that's a very good descriptor of where I'm at. I'll get to that in a second, but I do want to say thank you for giving me the option to not talk about it in the last couple episodes ago.
Right.
In the last breeds, you mentioned Meathouse, and I had, unless he edits this out, and I'm like, do I want to edit it out? I actually thought about it. No, I want to continue working on this, so I appreciate this. This has been a frustrating project for me because as much as I really, really want to write this, it seems that when I sit down to write it, I don't want to write it because I'm not doing the work that I need to be doing. So yeah, that's what I like to talk about, is why that's happening, why I can't seem to get the motivation when I need it, and how to kind of work past that and how to push past that.
So let's just put a pause on it for a second, though, before we get into that, because I always want to talk to the listener for a second. So if you pop back, like I said, guys and gals, and you search Meathouse and you start listening to this, the first few episodes and so on, again, you'll hear a very different Dan, one who's full of excitement for the project, when it can't imagine a problem would arise in this project. And, it's all going to just, be a matter of, mathing it out and figuring out when you're going to write and so on and so forth. And, I remember distinctly, as I always do, but I remember at the time, like listening to you, Dan, and just sort of not really saying anything, but just realizing like this is, how it always begins. And then later on, there's going to be this point. I didn't bring it up then, but I was like, in my head, I was like, it'll be great later on when Dan's in the middle of this project and he's got, more or less a draft and he's stuck. Not that it'll be great for you, but it'd be a great lesson because this is the normal thing. Again, I was just, listening to you thinking, yep, you don't have no idea, Dan, what's coming down the pipe here, and it's, I don't mean to sound, glib, but, and I'm sure I know it's frustrating for you because I've been there too. But this is a real like common thing with screenwriting, especially. It's other projects too, but it's especially in screenwriting. I feel and I find there is a situation you get into as a screenwriter where it's very easy to look at the math of it. Because, a screenplay is really only what, 90 to 120 pages. It's a very manageable length compared to, say, a novel, which could run on to, 400 pages, maybe 1,000 pages if you're writing epic fantasy or something. So like 90 to 120, it seems very manageable. And you think also how many words are on those pages? Well, they're not that many words, really. And so again, it seems really manageable. And you think to yourself, oh, I can write, 3, 4 pages a day. You math out, let's say I only do a page a day. Worst case scenario will take me 3 months, right? Like that's the math of it. And it's very easy to like lose perspective on the difficulty of it because it seems so much simpler than other types of creative projects, but it isn't in many ways. And and you are kind of at the part where you start to realize like the difficulty of it in some ways. And part of the difficulty is simply the time that it has taken up to this point. And the fact that, you're kind of time-wise, you're removed from the initial interest in the project. And so there's lots of good sides of that, which, sometimes are hard to see, but the bad side of it is sort of a difficult position to be in where you kind of will naturally lose some momentum on the project. It's especially true when you have a draft done.
Mhm.
Often people think that's going to revitalize their, ability and interest in working on the project, but it often doesn't. It often, makes them frustrated and upset. It's, I don't know if you're frustrated and upset, but that's the normal thing,
Okay.
if that is sort of where you're at.
So
Talk a bit more about where you feel like your head is at and where the project is at.
but your advice is that what I really should have done is just strike while the iron is hot. While I'm feeling excited and motivated to write it, that's what I really should just bang out that first draft and not worry about anything else. Like harness that excitement for the project rather than just like worry about. I find myself just worrying about stuff, little details and stuff, and getting off track and that kind of stuff. And that usually what the problem is when I sit down to write.
And it's always going to happen, though. It's always going to happen because these projects are too big.
Yeah.
You can't just sit down and hammer it out before you lose momentum and interest. It's just, they're just too big.
Okay.
So I know like 3 people who can do it. Like I know one guy who can write novels that way. He has an idea for a novel. He thinks about it, thinks about it, sits down and writes a novel in a week. He's the same guy. His name is Tony Burgess. He wrote the movie Pontypool. So he also is like a screenwriter, and I don't know if he works that way exact on screenwriting, but I think he does more or less, right? Like he'll really meticulously think through it and get an idea and really work on the idea, and then he'll slam it out. And he'll go back and rework things. He's a very brilliant writer. It's not rushed work, but there's an energy to it that he's able to harness. But he's a madman. There's few people like that in the world. And certainly it's not a normal way to work, but it is like, so I feel like there's a level where the initial excitement people feel for projects, generally speaking, it's a great thing, great to harness it as much as you can, but you also at the same time need to sort of be prepped for when you don't have that anymore.
Okay.
Which is, how do you prep for that? Well, we can get into maybe in a second, but like dig a bit more into just where that project is at. Okay. Itself. Like how far are you along in actually the script and so on at this point?
Okay, well, I'll give you a bit of a status update. I've got 47 pages. So I'm about halfway through. Like honestly, that's exactly the halfway point for this. And in the story, we're just getting into what you would call the fun and games. Like they've discovered this house. Just to recap the story quickly, it's about a film crew. It takes place in the late 80s. A film crew shows up at this house, abandoned house, to shoot a movie, and then they quickly discover that the house comes to life and is eating them and doing all kinds of horrible things. And so the story is like this has happened. They've discovered this, and now it's like I've kind of split up the characters into different situations, and now they just kind of have to go through the horror of the house and then conclude it, right? And I've got an okay idea of where I want to go with it. I've done the cards, I've done all that stuff previously, so I still got all that work that I can go back to. But I just, again, when I sit down to actually come up with new stuff, I find myself struggling. And then I saw this clip of Alan Moore talking about this, and I thought it really fit well. He knows this stuff. Like, this guy is super good. He's like, when you sit down to write a script, and he was talking about specifically starting a new script, a new screenplay, all of a sudden you want to like check your watch to make sure it's running properly, or clean up your desktop on your computer, or do something, tidy your desk, do something. You're distracting yourself with all these little mundane tasks instead of actually getting to the work. And that's what I find myself doing as well. It's just like sidetracking myself with other things that I don't really need to worry about.
Right. And again, it's a normal and natural thing. You hear Alan Moore talking about it. Alan Moore, the genius writer, best comics writer in world history. He still gets wrapped up in that and so on. Even though he's a productive writer, he manages to do it, get wrapped up in it. The other thing is worth just pointing out, Dan, is you're at exactly the point where I would expect all this to happen. In fact, this is so common a place in a project, in a screenwriting project. This is so common a place to lose steam that there's a phrase screenwriters use to describe it, which is that you're stuck in the desert of the second act. Okay. Screenwriters will often talk about the desert of the second act, by which they mean the place where, it just seems like you can't get out, like you're lost. There's no landmarks. There's, it's painful, scorching sun overhead, what do you do other than sweat? And it's a tough place. Again, it's just a natural place where screenwriters will tend to lose steam. it's a common problem. It's not a unique problem in that way, and which is important to know. And I was also, I think, as Moore is pointing out, there's a universality in a sort of way to the problem and the symptoms. And so you can always have this. He's talking about the start of a project, right? But I think it's more true in many ways in the middle of the project. It always seems like there's something better to do than the writing. I think it's especially a problem if you aren't a full-time writer. But even if you are a full-time writer, like Moore is, or like, some of us are, you can still get wrapped up in that thing where it just has, it's especially true in a weird sort of way if nobody is looking over your shoulder, trying to, because it isn't like another job. It's not like you're working for a TV show, and if someone's coming by asking you, "Hey, where's that script?" Right, and you've got a clear external deadline. You have no external deadline. It's not like you haven't. You're not in that position where you have external factors forcing your hand, and there's a good side to that and a bad side to that. The bad side to it is it's very easy to, understandably, prioritize one, things that have external deadlines, and two, things that don't but seem pressing. So, go wash the dishes, go clean the room, organize the DVDs behind you. Like, maybe I should reorganize them.
I've done that a few times. Yes, absolutely.
You know what I mean? But it's a normal thing. And so why though? Why is it that this happens to people? So, there's a lot of reasons. And the problem is figuring out which reasons are real and which reasons relate to you. So let me just run for a second through some of the common things, and just stop me at any point if you feel like this is something you've been experiencing or might apply, and we can kind of dig more into it. But if they're not reasons that apply to you, I think they're still worth bringing up because they might apply to the listener. So one really common thing is people get into the idea that they need to write the scenes in order. And they will just be, writing page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. They get to page 47 and they don't know what to put on page 48, and then so they stop. And of course, the fix to that particular solution is to realize you don't need to know what happens on page 48, as long as you know what happens somewhere later. So if you have, if you're stuck, say, in a scene trying to figure out what's the next scene or what's going to happen next in this scene, one simple solution is to stop trying to figure it out and just jump ahead to another scene. Like maybe for example, like you don't know maybe the next thing Tom's going to do. I don't think Tom's a character in the film, but just as an example, if Tom's in a room with a dog and the dog is barking and trapped him in a corner, he's trying to get out of the corner, you don't know what he's going to do next. Well, a lot of people will be tempted to sit there and try to figure it out, and of course the better solution is to not do that. The better solution is to think, okay, well, after he gets out of the room with the dog, I know he's going to end up kidnapping a cat. We'll just write that scene instead. So is there anything else in the script you could be working on rather than the thing that you're stuck on is, I guess, the first sort of test or question. Have you, does that resonate at all with you or no?
Yeah. In a way, because partly what I want to do with this is I want to take, like, again, I split off these characters into different parts of the house, and I want to cut between them as we go through the movie. And I find myself wanting to do that in the script because, again, I want it to go linearly, like this, like you would see it on the screen if you're watching the movie.
Right.
But I find that, again, I have a hard time. I don't know when to cut away. I don't know, like sometimes I'll get to the end of a scene and go, no, which one should I go back to at this point? And I worry about, like, should I cut to this one or this one? But now I wonder, maybe I should just like write it all out, like write the sequence for that one group of characters out completely, and then I can copy and paste them as I want later on.
What you're doing is you're directing the movie. So again, it's a common problem because it's an outgrowth of actually doing a good job. It's a weird problem, but it's a normal problem, because if you're actually like get your head into this thing and you start to like see how it would all work out, and as you get better at script writing, that's what you kind of start to do. You start to like visualize. So initially, often people have a hard time visualizing how these things would play out. and figuring out how to like write it so that it would play out in this way. But then once you kind of figure that problem out, you get a new problem, which is now that you're sort of editing the movie or directing the movie in your head, you get stuck into like, oh well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Where should I go next? Should I cut to this person? Should I cut to that person? And the problem fundamentally that you're in now is you're directing the movie, not writing it on a certain level. So I would say exactly like the next thing to the simplest thing to try to do in these sorts of scenarios is just and there's a couple ways to do it. Like so one way to do it would just be to write in the script something happens at this point and where Tom does whatever. And then just jump to the next scene and start writing the next scene where you know what to write. Or, I sometimes will just write scene missing and just like jump to the next scene. So I don't even know what's supposed to be here, but I know something goes here. Pace wise, it doesn't make sense that this thing follows this thing, but I don't know what goes in between. So I'll just write scene missing and then I'll just put the next thing. I know it doesn't go there, but that's what I'll do. And then even just anything you can, even if you just have a fragment of an idea, like it'd be cool if this visual thing happened, but I don't know what scene it would go in. Just write that cool thing out, but the thing that's frustrating is the document goes from being a well-organized, polished, readable document to being a fragmentary mess. And you just have to, either one, become comfortable with that and just comfortable with the idea that, okay, it's going to be messy here and here and here, but then when I go back over, I'll smooth it out. Or if that's really a hang up, if you really hate how this document is becoming a disorganized mess, just start a new document and make each little scene idea you have its own document, and then just later on pull them in. So either one is fine. I like to keep it all in one document because it's just too easy to lose things on my computer. But sometimes the mental block of it is like, I feel like I'm wrecking the script by adding all this shit into it.
Yeah.
Well, then just, fine cordon it out into different documents. But just, if you, again, I think it's true whenever you're working on a project. If you're ever stuck, it's worth just putting a placeholder in and moving on. Or by contrast, if you're ever in a position where you don't like what you're writing right now, it might just be a sign that it's the wrong thing to put into the script. And so rather than trying to figure out how to make it work and how to make a better version of it, possibly you just want to get rid of that thing. Maybe there is no good version of it. And that's why you're on some level, you understand that in your brain, but you don't understand it like emotionally, or it doesn't feel logical. Like sometimes it's like, oh, well, I'm stuck. I can't figure out how to get the scene to work. Well, sometimes the problem is the scene doesn't work. And there's no way to get it to work. It just, you need to get rid of it and put something else there, but you maybe don't know what it is. But, so sometimes your brain is sort of trying to help you in a way of like, hey, don't write that scene. It's no good.
Yeah.
You've decided it's good. Yeah, but you've decided it's good, right? And so you want to kind of carry it through, but that's not always the case, and it's tough because a lot of the times if you force your way through it, the frustrating thing is you can sometimes get those scenes to work, and you can sometimes like brute force, use all the tricks and techniques you've learned, get your way through the scene, and then you have it in the script, and then later on you end up deleting it.
Of course,
I do that all the time. I kind of like get hung up on some idea and I get it in the book. I finally get it to work, but it stands out in a weird, it just doesn't work inside this thing, and I have to take it out. I've done it constantly.
So
the eye sector, I had that. I had a scene where the guy, he fell asleep on a bus, and his father comes out of the bathroom with a giant sword. And it was this really powerful, weird, surrealistic scene. It just didn't work at all. Outside of it working as a scene, it didn't work in the story. There's no reason for him to be on a bus in the story. There's no reason the father figure ended up being less important than the mother figure. swords didn't work into it visually as a concept anymore, as it had been developing. There's just all these ways in which the scene itself, unfortunately, really worked well, but it didn't fit in the story, and I wasted a lot of time trying to fit it in. And on the end, I just had to cut it. I spent so much time on that because I thought it was going to work so well.
Interesting, but you could probably take that image and use it in something else, right? Maybe you can.
That's the delusion.
That's what Gregory says all the time.
I know, but he does. But it's true, and he's right. But it rarely happens.
Interesting.
It does happen. I've had it. I've done it here and there. Mostly, it's just something you tell yourself, so to give yourself permission to take it out of the script.
Okay, that's fair enough. So what you're telling me is that it's okay to have a first draft that is disjointed, that maybe has inconsistencies, that like if I've forgotten about some setup I gave in the opening act and it's not paid off, that kind of stuff can exist because I'm going to go through and fix it later.
Not only can it exist, it will exist. Even if you think you've done it all right, you haven't. Okay. Like there will be a thing like that. There will be a thing you set up and never paid off, or a thing you pay off that you didn't set up properly. Like those things just will be in the script, whether you realize it or not in the first draft. And it's actually better if you realize it and make a note to yourself, like, hey, this thing's being set up, but I don't know, we never see this key again, for example. Mm-hmm. The guy finds key, you had an idea in your head and then you forgot what it was, or just it didn't become relevant anymore later on as the thing played out. That stuff's not just can it happen? Like, so one, you should allow yourself to have these problems and inconsistencies in the draft and not be worried about polishing them all out at this stage. But two, even if you are focusing on trying to polish the thing and make it a really strong first draft, you're going to end up making mistakes. It's just going to happen. It happens all the time.
Okay. What's your next?
It's more important that you catch it when you're rereading it, I should say, rewriting it. And so actually, what's better now is if it is a mess, and you pointed out the messiness. The problem you'll get into is if you really work at it and make it smooth, you'll hide the mistakes from yourself. And then it'll keep persisting in drafts that, and that's really the more dangerous thing. It's strangely better to have a messy, disjointed first draft in that sense. As long as the core of the story is working, all the surface level stuff doesn't really matter as much.
Okay.
So the other common mistake or thing that happens, it's not exactly a mistake, but the other common thing that happens in these moments is the story lacks a midpoint. So it might not be the case for you, but a lot of times people are thinking about it so it's very natural to think of a movie script as a 3-act structure. First act, second act, third act, right? Beginning, middle, end. This is what not only feels natural when you're talking about stories, beginning, middle, end, 3 parts. It's also what is often talked about in screenwriting textbooks as the natural structure, first, second, third act. But it's wrong. There is no good reason to have a 3-act structure. It, in fact, is a terrible structure for a screenplay. And mathematically, you can see immediately, if you think about it, why that is the case. First act, 30 pages. Second act, 60 pages. Third act, 30 pages. Why is the second act 60 pages, Dan? The answer is because screenwriting textbooks tell you to make it 60 pages. In reality, what works better always is a 4-act structure in a screenplay, each act being roughly of equal length. And then in the middle of the film, especially in a horror film, in the middle of the film, there's a revolution in the level of knowledge and the relation of the characters to the monster. So halfway, again, the classic structure in a horror film is to have this midpoint where halfway through the movie, they realize the house is haunted. Halfway through the movie, they can't ignore that there's a vampire out there anymore. And they go from sort of being murdered by the thing, but ignoring its existence, not knowing why everyone is showing up, covered in, with no blood in their bodies and 2, holes in their neck. And then maybe one person kind of thinks it's a vampire, but no one else is willing to admit it. And then, they can no longer ignore it. They have to admit it. And they spend the rest of the movie trying to, fight. So it's like flight from the monster, and then they have to fight the monster. It's sort of the natural progression. So you may or may not, I don't know if you have a midpoint right now, because I think we've talked about this before, but if you don't have a midpoint built into the story, likely what the problem you're having is you don't have a midpoint. And so you're trying to find like another 33 pages of stuff. But you really only need 3 more pages, maybe.
Yeah. That
or
definitely,
or at the point where you could turn it.
yeah, I would say that's definitely been something I thought about as I'm writing. I did think in terms of a 3-act structure. Did the Save the Cat book talk about that?
They do. Everyone talks about it.
Maybe that's where I got it
talks
from.
about it.
But I was worried. I found myself worrying about like, well, I should be on this by page 33, and this should be the characters. But I, all that stuff kind of got me sidetracked. What I found what really worked when I actually sat down to write was just like pantsing it, as you guys have said, just going on, just writing it as I imagine it, dialogue, action, however. And I've had some really successful sessions doing that. So that's going to want to keep writing them.
That approach peters out around the middle always.
Okay.
Because you hit a point where you should have, and you're right, literally mathematically, right in this position. You're right around the point where they should realize this is a meat house.
Yes.
And they should spend the rest of it trying to get out of the meat house.
Yes.
And so what likely is happening on some level is you've in your head or mathematically you've decided later on is when they realize it's the meat house. Before the 3rd act starts, when they're going to realize it's a meat house, but probably it should happen sooner.
And I always thought the 3rd act is the conclusion, like all the action and all the
often. But if you look at horror specifically, the really good horror, it'll almost always pivot in the middle.
Okay.
Because otherwise it starts to drag out. You have like the existing setup of how things are going. You get to a point around the middle where if you don't flip it and revitalize like what's going on here, you're just repeating what you've done before. Like you're just finding more creepy things that happen in the house, but then we don't really know why they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like you hit a point where it's like you've had enough of that.
Mm-hmm.
And now you need to flip it. Like, okay, now it's clear as a meat house. Whatever that means is like it's real clear. They all know they're in trouble. How are they going to get out of it? Well, and then the ante of everything just ramps up. Okay. So it doesn't have to be like methodically mathematical, like in that middle like that. But you'll see it almost all the time. The Shining does that. That's the moment where Danny gets touched. The girl in the bathtub grabs him. And it's like, oh, these things can touch you. There's a reality. They're coming after you. Like the whole tenor of the thing shifts. Mm-hmm. You see it constantly. Sometimes you see it and it makes the movie worse. Like in Us, they get out of the house.
Right.
They should be trapped in the house the whole movie, but they get out of the house. So again, it's a clean midpoint shift, and that's good. But unfortunately, it also shifts you from horror to sci-fi, which doesn't work in that particular movie. But that shift is like an important shift often to have happen. And I would suggest, again, a really common thing that would happen at this point is you're sort of losing steam because the story is losing steam. And you're just sort of trying to extend the previous stuff that's been happening by finding more versions of it. But really, you need to move on to the next thing. The next like major flip in the story. Like, you give it a real turn or a reversal or some other, again, the natural thing in your house story would be something happens and it's a big thing that happens. And now they all realize they're in the meat house.
Yeah. I've written that scene, and now I've just split them up, and now I just have these get different threads that I want to kind of have them all go off and do things. So that's my next step.
Yeah, and you're pacing and editing from one to the other. Again, leave that for later on. It's just not. It's too hard to do at this when like thinking of like, okay, this, then this, then this, then this, because you start to move into the director or the editor's job rather than the writer's job of making sure all these scenes. Like each story, what would probably help you right now is to, again, maybe make a separate document where you just, each thread, you follow it until they start to come together again. and then start carving it up, figuring out like which goes where. It's just it gets too complicated to do it in your head, at this point. The other thing where sometimes people will just lose steam in this period is they just literally, they emotionally forget why they're writing the thing. And so sometimes that's just like, again, if in the early stages of any project, you've got a clear sense of what you want to do. You've got kind of an excitement for it. You've got, there's a thing that's really getting you excited about it. Maybe there's one scene that you really want to do. Like, oh, it'd be cool if this happened, right? And then what happens partway through into the project, usually about halfway, is that you've written that scene. And then also you've, like you're still writing the story. It's like, I've done all the cool things I wanted to do, but I'm not done. And at that point, it's tough because you'll kind of almost emotionally satisfy yourself, but the project's not done. And it's a tough thing because it's kind of like when you go to decide you're going to start a diet tomorrow, right? You think, I'm going to get my life together and start, doing whatever, start dieting or start running or whatever it is, start exercising, going to the gym. And you make the decision. You're like, yes, I feel powerful having made this decision. And then, now you don't need to do any of that stuff you just were thinking about doing because you already feel the power, right? In fact, everything that you do now would make you feel less powerful. Going to the gym, you realize how out of shape you are, right? You go with friends, you're sad that you can't drink beer, whatever it is. You already had the reward, the highest point of reward that you're going to get. Everything else is so delayed in gratification now, and it's tough. So it's tough to kind of just keep your eye on the prize and keep your mind on track and yourself on goal, because emotionally you already had the payoff on some level. And it's especially true, like I say, if people have a scene they really thought would be great, and then they write that scene early on in the story, and then like, well, now you just got to think of more scenes. Nothing like will really satisfy you in the same way.
Yeah, I say I've had about 3 or 4 scenes like that I've thought about and got excited about, but I've written them all already, and that was a while ago. Right.
Yeah, and so it's a tough thing because again, it's normal and natural, but it also like it's real that it's a problem. So what I find usually helps, unfortunately, is a thing you can't do anymore, but you can kind of do a version of it. So what helps is at the very beginning of the project, I find one of the best things to do is to just take out a cue card or something, just like a little card. I like these cue cards because I like cue cards. And just write on the cue card, like, why do I want to write this story? Why do I want to write Meathouse? And I would just include in point form the cue card, like all the big like things that right now are exciting to me about Meathouse. Again, this is before the project starts. So you can do that. I would suggest you do that now as well, but it's just harder to do now because they're further from your mind. But try to just sort of recapture in your head, like, well, why did I want to do this thing in the first place? So like maybe one, and it could waffle between, I would say include both like things like, your artist, just like, it's going to be fun to write a screenplay and like, or like, I really want to, or like things like you want to get out of the project. Like I want to, have a screenplay done. I want to prove to myself that I can write a screenplay. I want to have like a script I can show people, maybe I'd love to get a movie made, I just want to, anything that's, whether it's a artistic reason, like I just want to tell this story because I think it's an important story or whatever. Like sometimes that's the important thing for people, right? Or like it's just, I think it'd be fun, like whether it's an artistic goal that you want to accomplish or some just emotional thing, like I just think it'd be cool and fun to be a writer or whatever. Or if you just like have a businessy thing, like sometimes just like, I think I can make money writing Meathouse, like whatever the goal is, whatever the initial thing that gets you excited and interested in it, it's worth just writing it down because you'll forget. And it sounds weird to say that. And it's always, people just disregard it when I say this to them at the start of the project, because I might even have said it to you, and we might, if we scroll back, I'm not sure. But people always forget because they think in their heads when they're starting a project, like, oh, I'll never forget what it feels like to
Right.
be excited about Meathouse. I'll never forget why I wanted to write it, but you will. You'll just forget why. And it's normal. You get into this position where like the last thing you want to do is write this thing anymore. And it's like sometimes it helps like to just remind yourself as to why it matters. Because it's easy to forget.
You're reminding me that I actually recorded the podcast episode where we came up with the idea for this, and that was a podcast that we recorded for Super Pulp Science at FanQuest a number of years ago, almost 3 years ago now, I think that was. Yeah. So I should go back and listen to that, I think, and listen to some of these other episodes. I should go back and listen to my past self that was all motivated and excited.
It sounds weird, but it's true. Like, because that's almost what the card is, right? It's just like your past self who's all excited is telling your current self who's not excited, hey, here's why you should be excited. It sounds strange and it sounds artificial, but it is, I think, a necessary sort of thing to do, to just check in now and again with yourself about like, hey, why am I doing this thing again? Because like it's easy to kind of forget about it because not every day is an exciting day in the Meathouse. Not every day is like, I always say to people, like, the cliche of writing is that you get inspired and you have all these great ideas and you can't wait to write them down. They're just rushing out of you. And that does happen. But it happens like 2% of the time. And so so much of the work of it is the other 98% of the time just tricking yourself into believing that it's those other 2% of the time. Because the weird thing is, at the end of the day, when you fast forward to the future where the thing is done and you're reading it, looking at it, even you cannot tell what the difference was. Page by page, no reader can tell what days you were excited and what days you weren't excited. And even you will remember because it all, is the same on the page. And the same thing is true if you think you're doing good work versus bad work. And it's really tough. Sometimes people will get stuck. This is another thing that often happens in this period, although I don't know if it's happening for you, but sometimes people will, again, in the kind of middle of the project, they'll start to feel frustrated by how they feel like some of it's really good and some of it's really bad. And they'll feel like it's too inconsistent, or too much of it is bad, or that part's really good, but this part's really bad. I don't know.
What do you mean by bad? You mean like dialogue? Do you mean description, or what? Like just
whatever you think. Just when you look at it, like when you sit down and write, for example, and I'm saying you, but I mean anyone. You'll always have days you feel like you're doing a good job and days you feel like you're doing a bad job. So you'll have days when you're excited by what you've written and you think it's great. And you'll have other days when you're like, everything I'm writing is terrible today. Or you look back at yesterday's work that you thought was great and today you think it's terrible. And it's important to understand that the good, the bad, it's all just your temporary emotional state, and it has nothing to do necessarily with the actual quality of the work. Okay. You could feel like you're a genius and be writing terrible work. You could feel like you're doing a horrible job and be writing great work. But what's more normal is some days you feel like it's great and going well, and other days you feel like it's horrible and going poorly. At the end of the project, you won't be able to tell the difference. And neither will a reader. At the end of the project, you'll have like a page and you won't know, you won't know whether you wrote that page feeling good about it or bad about it. You won't know, the reader won't know whether or not you were excited and inspired or just dragging it out of yourself because you had the flu. It all just reads the same. But in the moment, it feels very different. And so it's sometimes it's even like a weird thing like that, where it's like, you just kind of like feel like you feel like it's not going well and you should just not, I'll just do it tomorrow instead. It's not going well today. It's rarely the case. You can't give into your temporary emotional state in that sort of way. And I think part of the, like, trying to remember what you thought was exciting about this project is sort of that. It's like trying to remember like why you want to do this thing in the first place. Now there's a tool I like to recommend. The other thing which you brought up as like a common issue that people have is distractions, or with things, whether it's like somebody distracting you or your phone going off and distracting you, or whether it's you distracting yourself by like something else grabs your attention, or you just push your attention off to another thing. I find there's like three classes of things that tend to throw people off wherever they are in a project. One is that their anxieties, whether it's like your anxiety and worry about this project and how it's not going well, or I don't know what to do next or whatever, or maybe just anxiety about other things in life, like, I'm broke, or like, my, wife or girlfriend is bothering me about this thing that I haven't done yet. And, oh, when am I going to do that? Like, or it's like a work thing, like, oh man, I got this deadline. What am I going to do? Like, there's like a class of worries, like whether they relate to or don't relate to the thing you're doing. You're worrying about, you have anxiety about something that's kind of gets your brain space, it occupies your mental space and gets you off track. And the other thing is, of course, distractions, like things distracting you. But then the other thing is just having ideas for other things, which is, almost another sort of thing. You're like, this is actually the part of the project where I would expect you to come up with another idea for a movie that you think is maybe better than this one.
Oh, I don't know if it's better, but I have several other ideas. I don't know if they're movies, but I have several other story ideas, and I don't want to classify them yet as things. But yes, absolutely.
And then you think, oh, maybe I should stop this and work on this other thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a normal, yeah. And so all of those are the same thing on a certain level. They're all things that are pulling your focus, but they seem different. The idea for a cool, new, even better movie is the same as, you're checking Facebook and accomplishing nothing. It feels different, but it is the same. And so what I always recommend to people is this thing I like to call the focus form. And if people, I used to have on website, maybe I'll get this put up on this post. I'll get Ren to do it.
Put the links in the show notes. Put a link in the show.
I'll put the link in the show notes, but there's a downloaded, I just made it into a form that people can download. But I'll just sort of show you on this. So you just draw a quadrant. You take a page and you draw a line down the middle, a line across, just like dividing the page in four. And then what you do is in the top left square, you kind of divide that again in half. So the top left square is divided in half. And at the top, you write what. And the bottom of it, you write why. And this is the part where you're, writing down what you're focusing on. So in this case, I might write Meathouse. I'm writing, and I would say, like, in the what section, you just write, what am I working on today? So Meathouse is too big. You would write something more narrow that you're going to try to accomplish in the writing session. So let's say, the scene in Meathouse where, Tom dies. So again, I can't remember if there's a Tom in it. I'm just saying as an example, the scene in Meathouse where Tom dies. And then underneath it, you write why. Why am I writing this today? And of course, there could be a lot of reasons, but like the reasons could be anywhere from like, will be a fun scene to write, to, going to be scary, like an artistic reason. There's an emotional reason. Will it be fun to do? I've been looking forward to this scene, the whole script. That's an emotional reason why you might do it. It could just be an artistic reason. This is going to be the scariest scene. It's really got to work. I got to spend some time on it. Again, that's an artistic why. And it could just be like a practical why, like due tomorrow, right? Like, yeah, a why that's a bit more businessy or practical. Now left of that, or sorry, right of that, in the other square, the top right square, you write ideas. And this is just a box where whenever you have an idea for something that isn't this scene in Meathouse, whether it's, another scene in a different part of Meathouse, or whether it's, a cool idea for another movie idea, or whether it's like, hey, what I should go to the store and get some milk. Any other idea that's not directly the thing what you're working on, you just quickly record it there. And then you have in the bottom left, you write down anxieties. And literally, and that's where you just capture your anxiety. So if you find yourself worrying about this writing is shit, you write that down. This writing is shit today. If you find yourself worrying about like, how am I going to get $100 to pay my taxes or whatever, you write that down. If you find yourself worrying about like, oh, my daughter's, a text being weird, not answering my text, you write that down. And then in another area in the bottom right, you have a field for distractions. So if you find yourself checking your phone for text, you write checked phone for text. If you find yourself on Twitter somehow, you write getting angry on Twitter. If you find yourself, in the next room, looking through the fridge, right, hungry and eating, and snacking, whatever. So anytime you're pulled away from what you're doing by some idea or some anxiety or some distraction, you just note it down, and then you go right to the top left. So once you catch yourself with the idea, catch yourself distracted, catch yourself anxious, you record the thing that's been, pulling your attention, and then you reread what you're supposed to be doing and why. So you literally just remind yourself what you're supposed to be doing and why, and then you go back to it. So the purpose of this form is twofold or threefold, really. So number one, it's a way to practice catching yourself, because of course the insidious thing isn't that you get distracted. It's normal to get distracted. The problem is when you don't realize you've gotten distracted, and it just drags on. All of a sudden you get distracted by you start doing something else, and then you get distracted from that and start doing something else. Then you get distracted by that, start doing something else. All of a sudden you're in another room in the house and you don't even know why you're there or what you were doing, right? So one is like, it's sort of a practicing the early intervention of catching yourself being distracted or having your focus pulled away by an idea or whatever. Number two, it's a repository of that stuff. And so, of course, if you have a good idea, you want to write down your good idea, right? If you have an anxiety thing that you're worrying about, what a psychologist will tell you, if you really have an anxiety problem, is they say you should actually schedule time to be anxious. And when you're not in your scheduled anxiety time, just record the things you're worrying about and just say to yourself, okay, I'll worry about that later. So now your brain is like satisfied on a certain level. It's like, okay, I want to worry about this thing, but we'll just do it later rather than now. That's fine. It's like a deal you make with your brain on a certain level, and it allows you to kind of set the anxiety aside a little bit. Like there's a lot of psychology involved in that. They call it a worry schedule off. And if you want to Google worry schedule, sometimes that will bring you the science and so on. It's a CBT technique. And distractions, of course, the reason you want to record distractions is at the end of your session, you want to do a couple things with this form. So when you're, again, one, it's helping you kind of realize you're off track to use the form. Two, it helps you get back on track by kind of reminding you what you're supposed to be doing and why you're supposed to be doing it. Like, again, revisiting the motivation as well as the thing you're supposed to be doing. But additionally, at the end of your session, one, you can look at your cool ideas and just transfer them to a notebook where they belong. Or you realize this idea is terrible. I just thought it was great because it was my way to get out of this thing I didn't want to do. So sometimes you realize it's a great idea, you put it in a notebook. Other times you realize, oh, this idea is stupid. Like 2 minutes later, you realize it's stupid. But at the time, it was so great, you had to stop everything and keep working on it, right? Mm-hmm. With anxieties, again, sometimes it's truly indicative of a problem in your life you need to solve, and you should give it a time and attention, and you should kind of worry about it and think about it. And, again, it helps to get that flow going. Again, now you're setting aside time to actually deal with the issue and so on. But most of the time, the anxiety is gone by the time your writing's done. Like it's felt really big and significant, but really you later on you're like, I don't need to worry about that. If you're worrying about your daughter not texting you back, maybe she already texted you back by this point, or you realize like, oh, what am I being ridiculous for? Who gives a shit, right? So again, sometimes that's stuff to pay attention to, sometimes it's not, just like with ideas. But in the moment, it always seems important. If you just push the moment back, you realize about half that stuff isn't important. Whether it's an idea or an anxiety, you just kind of, your brain's just done with it, but in that later point. So now you've successfully kept what you need to keep and transferred it to a proper location. And then everything else you just can forget about. And with distractions, it's a bit more of a machine in a sense. There's more of a system for distractions. So if you look at distractions, like, okay, I got distracted because my phone ringer went off. Next time, turn your phone ringer off before you get started. I got distracted because I was hungry. I went to the fridge and I started snacking. Well, let's just put some snacks on the desk. I got distracted because I was checking Facebook. Maybe I'll just block Facebook for that hour or whatever. Or I just couldn't help going on the internet. Maybe I'll just turn the internet off before I start my writing session. Again, the distractions, you want to figure out how to remove them. The anxieties, you want to figure out where is there a proper place, and how to, again, you're kind of looking towards removing them, but it's maybe not as obvious or immediate as I just turn my notifications off for this hour. The idea is, again, you want to push them into their proper place. None of that stuff is going to help you do the writing in that moment. It's just going to pull your focus away. So I like to just give people the form, and I like printed it up in a PDF, but you can just do it on a scrap of paper. It's just a real simple thing.
Thank you. That's really
It works shockingly well, to the point where you kind of get mad at yourself that you didn't think of it before. Because why? Because again, so much of what pulls your focus away from what you're supposed to be doing is just a function of either not being clear on what you're supposed to be doing, which is, again, one of the first values of the formalizing it like that. Sometimes, you have in your head, oh, I should write Meathouse. Well, you can't write Meathouse in an hour. And really, you need to maybe just break down what it is I should be doing today. And possibly it's not a thing immediately. Again, you might just be thinking, oh, I should write page 48. But maybe the solution is to write page 67 right now.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Often what I would do, like I do checklists, like daily checklists where I write down all the things I have to get done today and I cross them off. And often I would write down Meathouse just for Meathouse, and that's it. And I would never get around to it because I wouldn't have any specific thing that in my mind of what I was going to be doing that day. Right. And then when I open up the script, the danger, I've gotten better at this. I'm not doing it as much as I used to, but when I open up that script document and I find myself starting at the beginning and wanting to rewrite it from the beginning, where I should just scroll right to the most recent page, start from there, and then continue on. So I got to start doing that.
Well, and there's a couple things involved in that, right? And so, but one of the core things, this is a super common mistake that people make. They'll think, oh, I got to work on Meathouse today. Oh, I got to work on my novel today. I got to write my book. They'll write book on the on their checklist, right? That's what I'm going to do today. But your brain knows you can't write a book in a day.
Yeah.
So somehow it's almost like a disconnect between your brain and yourself in a weird sort of way. It's like you're in your rational self is like, well, I know that I'm not going to sit and write the whole script today. I mean, I'll work on it for like an hour. But your brain's like looking at the list and going, Meathouse can't be done in an hour. So why start it?
Yeah.
Right. And whereas if you just broke it down to a manageable chunk, they say this if you're going to start working out of the gym, and that's your goal. People will say, I want to lose 50 pounds, right? That's their goal. I want to lose weight. Okay, well, what do you mean by lose weight? And they'll define that like, I want to lose 50 pounds. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does that involve? Often people will make a goal like, hey, I want to go to the gym, every day or every week. What they say is like, those are all bad goals on a certain level because they're too big, they're too large. Yes, maybe you need to go to the gym so that you can lose weight or whatever it is you're trying to do. Maybe you need to, write for 3 hours so that you can finish Meathouse or whatever. But the science says you need to just start with the absolute smallest thing. So like if you want to go to the gym, if you're trying to build the habit of going to the gym every day, what the science says is first you just put on your shoes. And that's your goal. You buy shoes that are for working out of the gym. Every day at like 3 o'clock when you think you should go to the gym, you just put the shoes on, you tie them up, and then you're done. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to go to the gym. You just need to get the habit of starting the shoes, get them on your feet. After you've mastered getting the shoes on your feet every day, then you start walking out of your door, right? You walk outside with the shoes on. That's all you need to do today. You go back inside if you want. Well, if you want to continue the gym, great. But otherwise, that's your goal. And you just keep building, right? Once you've got that in place, you can just put the next step in place. What people will try to do, they'll think every day I'm going to go to the gym and work out for 3 hours. So, well, it's too far from where you are right now, maybe. It's like you've actually been writing Meathouse, so it's a little different. But again, what's the manageable thing you could actually accomplish in the day or in the session. Maybe it's, writing a page, maybe it's writing a next scene, maybe it's writing, 10 pages, maybe it's just writing like the next thing Tom says,
Mhm.
and that's going to take you 5 minutes, but then, that's all you got time for today. Fine, whatever. You've still made some progress. And, again, you can build on the progress. The problem people make so often is they have a lofty goal, either consciously or unconsciously. They've made too big a goal. And so your brain is sort of working against you in a way because some part of you realizes that the goal is impossible or ill-defined, and it's just, well, why waste time with that then? And let's just do something else that's more manageable, like cleaning up my counter, because I can define that. It can be done in 10 minutes. Like, let's just do that. There's You need to make it seem as easy to write Meathouse as the things that are distracting you from writing Meathouse seem, because your brain's just going to go where the least resistance is in that sense, like water flowing downhill. So again, maybe to wrap up a little bit, I just want to say, like, these are all normal things that people do. This is the normal time to do them. Again, whether it's a structural artistic thing, like you just, maybe should have a midpoint reversal or some major structural moment where you shift focus in the script at this point, or whether it's an emotional thing, like it just feels too big now that I realize how hard it really is, and I need to find an easier thing to work on, or whether it's, some other combination of things. It's not an abnormal thing. It's so predictable, Dan, that you would be at this point, that I literally was predicting it, just not saying anything because, you got to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, you really do. You have to go through it to understand what you
It
want.
seems so mathematically simple relative to writing a novel,
Yeah.
but it isn't.
Very good. Well, I don't want to go to the gym, but I do want to write Meathouse. So thank you for your help.
Right.
This is all very helpful. I'm going to start doing this stuff, and I'm going to try. And my goal is to really just set aside time every day to dedicate
Yes.
to this.
Right.
And just like an hour a day, that's all I need, is like sit down and focus on this project, focus on Meathouse, and yes, break it down to simpler parts of, like, I'm going to write this scene, I'm going to write this whatever it is, and just go piece by piece. And I also, like, my main anxiety that I've been feeling a lot this whole time is really like the fear that this all sucks. I do absolutely feel that. I'm going to give you, I'm going to send it to you as soon as we're done here, like what I have so far, this 47 pages I have for you to read, and let me know when you get to it, how it is. As I've never done this kind of thing before. I've never really written creatively. I've only ever written like for news and for journalism and stuff like that. So this is something new for me that I'm afraid of doing. I'm a little bit afraid of it, and that's something I've had to overcome. Yeah.
So the two immediate things that I'll say is, one, try to aim lower than an hour a day on it. Try to aim for like 10 minutes a day on it. If you do more, great. If you can get to an hour, that's fantastic. But make the goal a smaller goal. I call this the Hell Week goal. I always say to students, I'll get them to do an exercise where I make them write a writing schedule out, and like get a calendar, put a writing schedule out when they're going to write every day in the week. Then I tell them, once they're done it, I say, now throw that in the garbage can, because that's what life will do to your schedule. And what you need instead is in the worst week where everything is terrible and everything is going wrong and everything is due, when will you write in that week? Because that's the schedule you need to put in place. You can always build on that, but if you can't get 10 minutes a day scheduled out and sorted out, and you can get on that 10-minute a day schedule, there's no way you can get on an hour a day schedule. And so if you can't do 10 minutes a day, then that means daily won't work for you. You need to figure out some other thing, right? So start just with a smaller goal, like a simpler, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Again, just get that figured out. Once you figure out how you can get 10 minutes a day to work, then you can add to that, right? But the problem is, when you have a bigger rock like that, it's tough to find a spot in your schedule for it, and so on.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, I have a lot of like 10 to 20 minute holes in my schedule because of my work. I'm an instructor, and I get to work and I have to sit there and wait for 20 minutes before my class starts. And why not just
Gregory, our friend Gregory used to do this. Super 12 Science fame. He would have a thing in his phone, and he would just start working on it whenever he was like in line at a grocery store. He just would write on so like 2 minutes he's like typing on it, 3 minutes here, 2 minutes there. Sure, it creates a disordered mess of a draft, but you got a draft. Yep. So that's the first thing I would say. Just set a smaller goal, set a lower bar for yourself, even though mathematically you can't do it in that little time ultimately, but you got to start in that place. But then the second thing I would say, Dan, is you really have to get comfortable with it being terrible. Your goal is not to write a good script at this point. And I can see the hang up that you're getting into, this hang up, and you're speaking like this. And this is, again, normal, common problem that people, especially in their first script or first novel or first real creative project, they'll get hung up on the idea that it needs to be good. It doesn't need to be good, right? It just needs to be done. You can worry about making it good later. Okay. Right now, it just needs to be done. And it can be, and so this is the other, thing I would say. If you find that you're stuck because you don't know what to write next, or you don't know what the next good thing is, if you really are getting hung up there, just commit to writing a terrible version and writing a terrible draft, a bad scene that won't work. You'll often hear that TV writing rooms, people will often do this as an actual writing practice. So like in a writing room where you're trying to, as a group, come up with a story, when the room is stuck and they don't know what to do next, often somebody in the room will say, okay, not this, but, or like, here's the bad version of this. Like they'll say that. Okay, the bad version is, he goes outside, punches a kid in the face, grabs their tennis racket, runs down the street. So that's the bad version of it. Like maybe in the scene, we need him to get a tennis racket, or we need him to do something someone sees that he'll get arrested for later. But what's going to be? Well, we don't know. But here's the bad version of it. Or it's not this, but what if he, kicks a dog? So again, not this. We need something to show that he's a bad guy, but like kicking a dog is a bit on the nose. But like, not this, but something that's a placeholder that just sort of moves you structurally from the one thing, the place you are, to the place you need to be next. And then later on, you can come in and replace that scene or fix it or whatever.
You can, it's almost like you want to get all the cliches and all the common tropes and everything out of your brain before you can come up with something original, right? You say, this is how this scene would play out in another show or another movie. Let's think of something different, but let's put this down now so we have something there. The worst case scenario, this is what happens, but I'll come up with something better, right? So like that's
exactly, it's that, but also you're taking the pressure off yourself because you no longer need something that's good. You just need something there. And what you'll often find, weirdly, is you'll now come up with a great idea because the pressure's off.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Well, we'll update some more about this later, Dan. And again, after I read the script, we'll maybe talk more specifically about, how it's looking and stuff. But in the meantime, those are sort of the tips I have for you and for the listener. If you're stuck out there on whatever you're at, especially if you're in the middle of a project, first, just know this is normal. And everyone has been there, so much so that it's a cliche that you're there. And there's literal, people, phrases and jokes and language and so on that writers will use both to describe it and also to try to get out of it. So thanks for chatting with me, Dan, about the Meathouse, or rather Meathouse, and keep writing the wrong way.